Quinn was wondering what the blood ritual was. After all, there wasn't much information revealed about it. But now that the system was offering for Vorden to become a blooded one, it all became clear to him. It was a ritual that would allow Vorden to turn into some type of vampire. I can't just turn Vorden into a vampire. He would have to deal with the same crap that I had to deal with, Quinn thought. Maybe I needed it to make myself stronger, but for Vorden, who was already strong, there's no upside. A thought then came into his mind. The blonde man in the video had told him to grow his own army, and soon others would come for him. Was this what he was talking about? In the end, though, Quinn decided it wasn't his decision to make. Vorden had helped big time, and if he wanted to, then it was his choice. And it would be nice to have people to go through this with. Hey, Vorden, if you had the option, or let's say I could turn you into a vampire, would you? Quinn asked. I don't want to hurt your feelings or anything like that, but the answer would be no, Vorden replied. Being weak for most of the day, sure, it's fine while we're on a planet like this, but besides, what would happen to my ability? Quinn waited for the AI to answer his concern. The AI actually started to seem smarter than he first thought. From what he said earlier and also giving him the option to use his skill, meant it was listening in on everything that was being said. Fine, I can see you're waiting for an answer. His whole cell structure would change, or he would then become a vampire, or something like one anyway, which yes would mean he would no longer have his ability. Not only that, but it might be a while before he could learn one as well. What do you mean? Quinn asked. You didn't learn the shadow ability the conventional way. There is no longer an ability book to learn from. It would be nearly impossible for you to teach it to him. Then you would have to wait until you found an ability book compatible with your vampire cells. Yeah, sorry Vorden, it probably would get rid of your ability, Quinn said, scratching the back of his head. I just thought I would ask. You might have been one of those types obsessed with vampires. There are people like that? Vorden replied. The two of them then started to head down the stadium floor, an area that was designed for combat. They had been looking around the room for an hour now, and it seemed like they were unable to find a place where the portal could be. They needed to make a decision, whether or not to leave the training center and head outside to look for another place. But before deciding any of that, Quinn wanted to get the hang of his new skills. Vorden was also interested and thought he might be able to help, since he had experience with using elemental abilities before. The first test was his dimensional storage skill. Just like with other skills, all he needed to do was think about it in his head and it would activate. While activated, the shadow from his own body started to wiggle and swirl about a bit. It looked like an ocean continually moving. Using a piece of metal he grabbed earlier, he slowly pushed it into his shadow, and the object started to sink in until it eventually disappeared. That's kinda neat, Vorden said watching. Can you get it back out? Quinn then placed his hand into his shadow. As he did, his arm sunk into it, but he could feel nothing. He then thought of the piece of metal, and suddenly he could feel something in his hand. He pulled out the piece of scrap metal. The two continued to do more tests with the dimensional storage. Quinn found out that not only his shadow could be used to gain access to things, but also Vorden's shadow or any shadow cast by the wall and buildings. When Quinn touched these shadows, they too would start to wiggle like his own shadow. The next test was to see if they could store items bigger than the shadow itself. Vorden gathered a bunch of chairs from the stadium and formed them into one giant flat metal circle. Then Quinn placed one hand on the circle while the other on his shadow to store the item. The shadow underneath his foot started to expand into the shadow created by the large circle. Eventually, the whole thing dropped inside. It seemed like the size of the item did not matter, and the good thing was it didn't take up any MC to use it. The next skill, as the one Quinn was looking forward to the most. Shadow Control, a skill that didn't say much in terms of description. Shadow Control Level 1 active. Then inside Quinn's mind, something had clicked. He felt like he had a new set of arms he could control. The shadow underneath his legs was alive and could freely move about. He lifted the shadow, and it was like a dark moving mist that continually surrounded him. I guess the skill is limited to just the shadow around you for now. It's like a level 1 Earth ability, said Vorden. I wonder why it needs so many mutant cells to activate and is considered a level 6. Using the shadow around him, Quinn was able to extend it out and lift the small piece of metal that he pulled from his dimension earlier. It was like controlling another person. After using it for a while, Quinn seemed to get the hang of it. He could move the shadow to go anywhere around his body, or he could form it into whatever he liked, even weapons. But when changing it into a sword-like shape and trying to cut the metal, it did nothing but go around it. It seemed like the shadow sword did not have the same properties. "Well, now that you got the hang of it, you want to spar a little?" Vorden asked. Having the shadow just active and moving about didn't take much MC. It only took about 1 point of MC per minute, which meant he could play about and activate the shadow for around an hour and a half if he didn't use any other skills. This didn't change no matter what he did with the shadow. However, there did seem to be one downside. While he was using his shadow control skill, he was unable to cast Shadow Cloak or even use his shadow dimension. The shadow underneath him was no longer there and was being controlled. If he activated the shadow dimension, the shadow would immediately fall to his feet again. Now the two of them stood opposite each other, ready to have a friendly fight. Vorden this time had a couple of metal balls hovering around him instead of spikes. "Be careful, Quinn. Although these might not be like the spikes, they can still do a lot of damage." "It's all right, Vorden. My body can handle it." Not using his full strength, Vorden repelled the ball at a decent speed, heading towards Quinn. At that moment, he lifted the shadow from his feet to form a type of wall. As the two made an impact, the ball seemed to slow down. It started sinking through the shadow slowly. Quinn stared at the ball carefully, and then when the ball had nearly passed through the shadow wall, it started to accelerate. Uh-oh! The ball left the shadow wall and slammed right into Quinn's stomach, falling to the ground. "Ah!" Quinn shouted as he tried to breathe in some air. "Well, I wasn't expecting that," Vorden said. "Try again," Quinn groaned. Vorden then fired the second ball of metal, and once again, Quinn lifted up his shadow shield, and the same result had appeared. Only this time, Quinn moved to the side, allowing the shadow to stay where it was before moving the shadow. The ball then carried on moving forward and banged into the stadium wall. "Let's see how physical attacks work," Vorden said as he moved forward and swung a long metal pipe he had in his hand. Using the shadow, Quinn blocked again, and the same thing happened. However, Vorden was easily able to pull the object away from the shadow and attack in a new place. He also noticed that the shadow was only covering Quinn's front and was not big enough to go around his back. If he was to use his attractive skill on one of the metal balls, he would easily be able to hurt Quinn right now. Vorden continued to attack with the metal pipe, and Quinn continued to block, moving the shadow in the areas where Vorden was attacking. That's when he realized something. Every time Quinn would hit his shadow, his MC points would go down by a chunk or so. The same thing had happened when he threw out the balls. The stronger the attack, it seemed the more MC points would be used from the shadow. Then when Vorden was about to attack one more time, "Wait! Stop, Vorden!" Quinn shouted. His shadow had vanished, and he had run out of MC points. The shadow acted as a type of shield. It wasn't solid enough to block attacks, but would be able to slow them down. Later, when Quinn's MC points were restored a little bit, he did a few other tests. If Vorden was close enough, he could use the shadow to grab onto him like an extra pair of hands, or even grab onto his legs, slowing him down. But there wasn't enough of the shadow to use it in both of these ways. He could simply either use the shadow to attack or to defend. "Well, I can see why your ability is a level 6 now," Vorden said. "I think it's more to do with how freely you can use the shadow, and my example would be the skills. Normally a skill would just be a different type of attack, but your ability, your shadows, can actually be used to do entirely new things. A separate storage space, masking you in the night, and even as a defensive shield. It's almost as if you have 3 abilities combined into one." Quinn was happy with the results of the shadow ability, and hearing Vorden talk about made him feel even more confident. He couldn't wait to unlock the other skills in the shadow tab of his system. With the spar over, the two of them decided that once Quinn was fully rested and his MT points were back, they would exit out of the training center and go exploring again. After all, if they did nothing, they would soon start to starve, and Vorden didn't want another instance where Quinn got too hungry. It took around 30 seconds for Quinn to gain back a single MC point, so it would take around an hour for all of his points to be restored. Then they would make their move back to the outside. Outside in the abandoned shelter, somewhere in the city between 2 broken-down buildings in the middle of the street, a specific area started to appear distorted. The space itself looked as if it was bending. Then little sparks of electricity were seen coming from it. Zap! Suddenly 4 people appeared holding hands together on the street. As soon as they saw where they were, they immediately let go. "Is everyone here?" Faye asked as she did a head count. The homeroom teacher Dell was here, although he was still wearing clothing like he was ready to teach. Then there was the doctor, Haley. She was dressed more appropriately, with high-end beast gear all over. She didn't look like her usual self in her white robe and looked almost intimidating. It was what one would expect, as her father was one of the generals of the school. Then there was Leo. He was wearing light armor that fitted tightly to the skin, similar to Faye. Both of their abilities focused on speed, so it was important not to wear something too heavy. "All right, our goal is to find the children," Faye said. The rescue team had arrived.
Hi, Quinn here. Wondering what happens next? If you want to jump the queue and unleash all episodes, click on the link here and install the Pocket FM app.